Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to thank and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Hi everyone, and welcome to Room by Room, the Home Organisation Science Insights podcast, produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We're champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element, with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Gabriella Yastra, coming to you from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's begin.
Hello and welcome back to Room by Room, the Home Organisation Science Insights podcast. It's no secret that the world is and has been suffering from a plethora of environmental issues that can be traced back to a litany of our daily human activities. Enter green home design, which is architecture's response to the environmental impact of our living, especially the construction of residential buildings. So joining us today is housing researcher Dr. Nicola Willand, who will be sharing with us about what we can do on our part to integrate sustainable practices into our home living. She's particularly interested in the interplay of housing, energy, health, and equity, and she also serves as senior lecturer at RMIT University, which happens to be my alma mater. Go Redbacks! With a background in architecture, she approaches sustainability in the built environment holistically. So I am very excited to hear from her today. We'll be chatting about what exactly green home design is, how it contributes to the sustainability cause, and how to implement this in your home, what the costs are, and so much more. So hi, Nicola. How are you going today?
I'm very well. Thank you. Lovely meeting you, Marie.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to meet you too. Now, before we begin, I would love to know, there are a slew of scientists who have attributed climate change to industrial factors. So what is the importance of integrating sustainable practices into our homes? What difference can it really make in the environment?
Sustainable practices to me encompass the design, the construction, but also maintenance and disposal of buildings, and in this case, our homes. So if you are quite holistic in the way you design these homes and you live in it, then these homes can promote quality of life, can be affordable, but also safeguarding the environment, biodiversity, and help support our community.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Serves also as a great preface for our topic for today. But before we go further into detail, I would love to get to know you better. So this is Have You Met Nicola? And the first question I'd love to ask you is, what do you like to do in your spare time?
Oh, I love spending time with my family, walking the dog. If I have a little bit more time, I love doing pottery. Just find it very therapeutic. But I think my family is quite happy that I don't have a lot of time because they're sick and tired of my pottery gifts that are always too thick, too heavy.
Oh, I would love pottery gifts. If your family doesn't want them, give them to me. And I'm sure many other people would love them too. So what kind of pottery do you make? Is it like a whole array of goods, or do you tend to stick to like one type of pottery
So
thing?
I do stoneware. I've never worked with porcelain. And I've tried throwing it and I've tried building by hand, but I get a little bit fanatic about it. So if I start it, I'll spend like a whole my weekend and, evenings doing it, and the whole house would be covered with pottery stuff and wrapped in plastic because I need to continue the next day. Anyway, I really get into it. It's quite time consuming, but just doing things with my hand, building it and then seeing it. And then you fire it and it comes out of the kiln and you don't know if it's going to break, what it's going to look like when you put the glazes on. So I think it's that creative process, which is just absolutely amazing. And I take my hat off to all accomplished potters around the world. Yeah, absolutely. I'm in awe of their craft.
Yeah, 100%. I love watching pottery videos, actually. And I've always wanted to do it. But the thing is, like, it takes so much time. Like, it takes so much of your time. You have to go to a kiln if you don't have one already. If you don't want to go to a kiln, you have to buy one. And so, like, it just takes a lot of time and money. And also, one thing that really gets me about pottery, I think, would be my crux, is that, like, the glaze doesn't look like what it looks like once you fired it. So, like, there's no possible way of really telling how it's going to look like unless you're super experienced, right?
Um, so about the cost, I don't have a kiln. I just go to pottery classes basically, which are really lovely because it's a very social experience. It's the same people coming on the same night, and you get to know them, and you can talk while you're doing all this, and you learn from each other. So I think that's amazing. And then there is a kiln, so they'll do the firing processes for you. And they have little samples where you see the different glazes and how the combination of the glazes will look like. So
Yeah.
I think that helps. I wouldn't be able to afford my own kiln. No, definitely not.
Yeah. Well, it's a fascinating hobby to get into. How did you get there?
I think we did pottery when I was at school. I must have been 12 or 13, and I just loved it. And then I wanted to become a potter. And my parents were sort of, how is this going to work? You would need a kiln. So I never really went down that way. And it was only a few years ago when I discovered there were these pottery classes that you could just go and do a course or go casually, that I realized I could do it in my spare time. So yeah, just absolutely love it.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, I had a pottery class as well in when I was in primary school, but our primary school made all of us do, like, we had to create a barnacle. We couldn't create anything else but a barnacle. And, like, I don't know, for the audience who don't know what a barnacle looks like, it doesn't look the prettiest. Maybe it like pretty, it's subjective potentially, but it's not the prettiest. There's plenty of holes, and I am scared of holes. So that never, like, called to me with, like, pottery. But in the recent years, I feel like pottery as a hobby has been emerging, and becoming a lot more popular. That's when I see a lot of people create such beautiful things and very innovative creations. So yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that with us. Now, my next question for you, because this is a home organization podcast and you have an architectural background, so how would you describe your interior style?
Um, Quite modern. So the lines are modern, quite uncluttered. I try to keep it tidy as well. Um, but we have pieces which are like African art or Aboriginal art that offset that sort of clean line. And I think the juxtaposition of cleanliness and quite pure aesthetic, and then something that's quite ornate or, a little bit broken, not perfect. And I think that's where the dynamic then is created.
Yeah, I feel like that juxtaposition makes the piece a lot more grand. It really makes the statement piece be a statement. Like, yeah, that's all. Yeah, it's a statement. Like, if it's just on its own in some way clean and nice and tidy. Now, is there a space or room in your home that you're particularly fond of?
We've got a fairly typical Australian home where the kitchen and the family area are one. It's one open space. And I love being in the kitchen because I can see over the family room, over the wide patio doors, straight onto the pool and garden area. And it's the center of the house. And we've got the bedrooms in two wings on the side. And a lot of our family life actually takes place in this very open, very light area. Yeah, everything's happening there almost.
Yeah, and if your kids are misbehaving around the house, you can see right through.
Well, importantly, when they were younger, I could see them in the pool while I could still be in the kitchen preparing dinner. And I think that was important.
Yeah, that's really pragmatic. Thank you for sharing that with us. Now, do you have a role model either in your professional life or your personal life?
Professionally, I think Professor Philippa Howden Chapman in New Zealand is amazing. She's been working on that intersection of housing and health for decades, and she's been really successful in changing housing policies in New Zealand for the better. So really to look at housing as a social determinant of health and improving housing, which I think is amazing. And personally, I think I would pick Amal Clooney. She's super clever. She isn't afraid of showing her femininity, and she's value driven. So I think that was what appeals to me. A lot of my work is about equity and fairness in the low carbon energy transition. So I think that's why I think she seems to get the balance right.
Oh, those are such excellent picks. Now that we've gotten to know you a little bit better, I think it is a good time to move on to the interview section. And for starters, I would love to get your definition of home organization.
For me, home organization is setting the scene or the framework to achieve a home environment that really fosters health, well-being. It's about clarifying the roles and responsibilities, dividing up tasks, but then also collaborating together, um, trying to achieve certain standards. And when I'm talking about this, I'm an architect, so it's all about the design. It's about the construction of the building itself, but also then living in it, maintaining it, so everyday practices and the householders themselves.
Yeah, that's really aptly put. And what is green home design, more in line with what we're talking about today? How does green home design contribute to energy efficiency?
To me, green home rather than just energy efficient home design means that there's a more holistic approach to designing homes. So, considering passive, climate sensitive techniques when it comes to the active systems like heating, cooling, lighting, to go for energy efficiency there. When it's about the energy itself, picking something that is low carbon or hopefully no carbon in outputs, but then also looking at the materials. Are they healthy and environmentally friendly? And to look at the siting of the home within the block and within the neighborhood and within the city or region as well. And I think if you get the balance right there, then green home design can help you save energy, reduce bills, ensure healthy and comfortable home environments, but also reduce the impact on the environment itself.
That's interesting. So, what materials are considered unhealthy or not ideal for our health?
So it's more about materials on the inside because we spend about 90% of our time indoors. So materials that are inside contribute to good or bad indoor air quality, and that can affect our health with various pathways. So if you've got materials that off gas chemicals, think of um, furniture, for example. A lot of the furniture is no longer solid timber, but it's a composite, like little timber pieces glued together, and that glue can contain formaldehyde. And if that gets into the environment, you're actually breathing it in, and that is unhealthy. Think of paints as well. They emit volatile organic compounds that can be carcinogenic. So it's furnishing. How is that being made, what kind of flame retardants are in the fabric of the furnishing, how does that affect health?
That is a lot to think about now. I never thought about before, and now I am kind of going through the list of furniture I have in my home and being like, I don't know if this has glue or not, and what exactly the material is. So, what advice do you have for finding these things out?
So firstly, go for second-hand furniture. Most of the off-gassing of this glue actually happens at the beginning. The hotter the environment, the more it will off-gas. So in summer, it'll off-gas a little bit more. So, but if you're buying something second-hand, then most of the nasty stuff is already gone. If you are buying something new, just ask. So big furniture houses will have information about emissions. Like there's E0 and E1. So they've got grades for these composite timber products, and you can have a look at those and then pick something that has got low emissions, paint as well. Otherwise, go for solid timber.
Yeah, that's really great advice. Thank you so much for sharing that. I already have really, really old furniture. I've had my furniture for years now. So I probably I probably was affected like when I first got it or something like that. I don't know. So I guess it doesn't affect me now, would it?
I don't know. You would need to have measurements in your home. But if you do get new furniture, open the doors, let it air. And, if you're expecting a new baby, for example, there's a lot of nest building happening before. Don't buy your furniture like a month before the baby arrives. Buy it early if you're buying it new, so it can actually air out and you can ventilate the room. Better go to friends, get their older furniture, that's already been used. It's kind of on the environment, you're sharing or reusing rather than building new. Anyway, don't paint the baby's room just before the baby comes. Paint it well in advance. Maybe in summer where the gassing happens at an increased rate and you are more likely to leave the windows wide open. You don't want that sort of new room smell. If you get into a new car, that smell?
Yeah.
That's indoor air pollution.
Oh, that's the smell. I kind of like the smell.
Think of all the plastic that is in cars, and then you've got the sun shining on it. It's off-gassing chemicals.
I've learned more than I thought I would today. One of which being that the smell that I like from new cars is destructive to my inner organs.
Yes. Keep the windows open.
Yeah.
If you're not sitting in heavy traffic, because then the outdoor air will be worse than the indoor air.
Is there any way to get away from it all?
I think just making conscious choices and, as I said, reusing is better than new because a lot of the stuff is in new products.
Yeah, for sure. And I think like one thing about thrifting or buying furniture secondhand, especially if it's from a secondhand shop or an op shop or a thrift store, is that you tend to find a lot better, like good quality pieces that are really, really old but still usable at like a much lower price than you would like a new piece of furniture that will break in like 2 years.
And if you think about how furniture was made, like 100 years ago, for example, they used solid timber. There's a lot of craftsmanship in it, and that really prolongs the longevity of the product. And if you think of sustainability and what it means, life cycle thinking is really at the heart of it. And only if it's really well done, well made, then it will have a long life. It will age less quickly. Obsolescence, so not being fashionable, is a thing that you can't plan for, but the aging process, you can really slow it down by maintaining products. Think about how your grandparents looked after their furniture, maybe a little bit better than we do nowadays. But there's lots of benefits looking at op shops. And Australia's got the most amazing op shops, not only for furniture, for clothes and everything.
Oh yeah, 100%. I have to agree with you there. But before I spiral into the whole op shop talk, because I most certainly can, are there any case studies or examples where sustainable housing practices or green home design have led to measurable improvements in health and well-being for residents?
Your question is really interesting because it sets up the question of causality. Have we been able to do experiments that prove certain benefits? And in brief, yes. So improvement in physical, social, and mental health is possible, especially for people who are experiencing vulnerability and health or income, for example, and who are living in very poorly performing homes. Most of the studies have been based on winter conditions rather than summer. And importantly, you need to ensure that adequate ventilation is provided and no one is smoking. So I talked about Philippa Howden-Chapman earlier. She was the one who pioneered these studies in New Zealand. So it wasn't about new homes, it was about retrofitting. Because if you take people into a new home environment, a lot changes. So you need to keep people in the home, but then you make the home environment better, and that's called something retrofitting. So this was all about energy efficiency. So they looked at before and after, they had control groups, and they found that when they insulated these very poorly performing homes of low-income households, that there were fewer respiratory symptoms in children, but also importantly, fewer days off school. So this was just quantitative. And it was all about winter and it was about warmth. If you insulate a home and you draft-proof the home, so you take away the drafts around windows or underneath doors, for example, you are hindering that exchange between outdoor and indoor air. So we talked about indoor air, and usually indoor air is more polluted than the outdoor air, depending on where you live. But, in New Zealand, this was certainly the case. So if you are now closing off that indoor air, you're sealing the building envelope, you are missing that connection, that sort of involuntary ventilation. So studies and other contexts then have found if people are smoking indoors, and smoking contributes a lot of chemicals into the air. It's never good for you, but it's not good for the people living with you, even if they're non-smokers. Then actually it could have adverse effects on health.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
So if you look at these retrofit studies, and we've done, big reviews of everything that was out there, we talk about pathways and pitfalls. So the pathways of energy efficiency improvements in this case was really that you had better warmth, lower risk of mold, and then fewer respiratory and cardiovascular symptoms, which then contribute to physiological health. If there's a lower risk of mold, well, then there's also greater satisfaction with the home that reduces stress and anxiety and improves social functioning. You're more likely to invite people over because you don't have mold that you're ashamed of. And that then contributes to better social health. Lower fuel costs because you're retrofitting, you're making it more efficient. Also means better affordability, but that seems to have had lesser of an impact. So it was more about the perception of the home. But if you seal this home and the ventilation is inadequate, then you're actually raising the risk of mold. You could have more respiratory symptoms and then worse health. And when I just gave you a little bit of a summary, I talked about vulnerable people or low-income people. And I think that it really speaks about the context. So these studies really were set out to help the people that the researchers or the councils or the state governments thought were worst off. So these tended to be older people or people who were disadvantaged. So there may have been a participation bias in these studies. Sometimes people got the retrofits, but there was a subsidy and they still had to contribute a little bit. So in these cases, maybe the worst of people couldn't really participate. Also, practices of ventilation. So for example, in my own retrofit and health study, to me, this window is closed, if it's like closed, and then this is open. When I spoke to people, they said, oh, my window is, closed, but it was open. For me, this was open. It's like 5 centimeters. No, this is closed. So it was unfathomable to them to close it completely. So having it a little bit open was closed. But that obviously means if you draft-proof the home, you seal these sort of tiny cracks around windows and doors, that's fine. But if the window is always open that much, well, then your indoor temperature really doesn't change because all the warmth that you're providing is going out of the window rather than around the windows. So, it's really about the context as well.
Yeah, 100%. And with people who, there is a lot of green home design now in new homes, and it's kind of like a marketing tool in some cases, and to where there's a people pay a premium for a green home. But for those who are unable to pay that markup for a green home, what should they be looking out for in existing homes that they could maybe modify?
If you are living in a home and you don't have a lot of money, it's your own home, the retrofit initiatives you can take is draft proofing. That is the most cost efficient, especially if you're living in a timber structure. A lot of Australian homes are made out of timber. A lot of American homes are made out of timber in various parts of Europe as well. So draft proofing, sealing those gaps. If you've got a timber floor, you'll have cracks around the sides, for example. You can buy draft proofing products at any hardware store, like little sealing tapes or little bars that you can attach to the bottom of the door. It doesn't cost a lot, and you can do it yourself. If you've got exhausts in the bathrooms, for example, you can buy little caps. They only open if the fan is on. Also, that is draft sealing. So that is the most cost-efficient way of retrofitting your home. If you're living in a colder climate, a heating-dominated climate, what you also want to do is, if you've got single glazed windows, for example, you could invest in heavy curtains and pelmets. So the curtains must sit on the ground, and then the pelmets at the top will ensure that if you close these curtains, you have trapped air between the curtain and the window. And this trapped air will then provide insulation. So just open it during the day. So any condensation that forms at the back of the curtains can dry out and you don't get mold. Also, you want the sun coming in during the day to warm up the house. But that is something you can do. Think about blinds on the inside. There are those honeycomb blinds that you may have seen. Again, that honeycomb is still air, which provides insulation. So if you let them down, in the evening when you're operating the heater, that will provide some insulation. If you don't have any insulation in the home, it's your own home. You do have agency to retrofit, to do material changes to the home. Think about ceiling insulation. Heat rises up. So most of the warmth we are losing in non-energy efficient homes is actually through the ceiling. So put a lid on it. Put ceiling insulation on top of the ceiling. That will immediately make a difference. If you have more funds, you can put insulation around the walls. go from single glazing to double glazing. That will make a difference. If you've got a timber floor, insulating from below can sometimes be done by yourself as well. So these are very efficient way and cost-effective ways of improving the energy efficiency of your home.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And for those who are looking out for who are on the market for green homes, how reliable are green home certifications like LEED or Passive House or Green Star Homes? What is the criteria for that certification?
It's really interesting that you talk about marketing, because depending on where you are in the world, the marketing of green home criteria actually happens very differently. But in general, if there is a certification in the marketing document, then it will be reliable. You would have had trained assessors that evaluate either design or the as-built or the performance of the home. If you've got voluntary tools, they are third-party certified. But before I go into those tools that you've just mentioned, I'd just like to take one step back and talk about rating tools in general, because they really differ. There is a whole plethora of assessments and evaluations of homes out there, and they vary by aims, by category. Some are regulatory and some are voluntary. So if you look at these building rating tools, the main reason they have been developed, to be quite frank, is that there was a market failure around the sustainability of buildings. So, the industry and governments, they thought we've got to do something about this, because it's not as if it's going to happen by itself. So sometimes these rating tools just set minimum environmental performance standards for building. That's really lifting the bottom of the market. Think about minimum efficiency standards, minimum house quality standards for rental homes. Basically, that's what it is, okay? It's sort of, oh my God, you need to have this just to pass.
Mm-hmm.
Then some of them are developing benchmarks for environmental performance. Some just want to showcase best practice, either on the local or national or international scale. And sometimes it's just about creating indicators. So you have something that you can compare if you've got two homes and you want to know what is better. So these rating tools, they offer a way to measure and sometimes benchmark performances or designs that are consistent in the way. If you look at two buildings, if you are a home buyer, or if you're looking for something to rent, that allows you to compare two different offers, and that helps you as the buyer or the renter to make decisions. But if you are an industry professionals, a lot of these tools actually are capacity building tools as well, because then the building industry professionals have a better idea of how to approach it. Maybe they did their studies 30 years ago where sustainability wasn't even on the agenda, and now they can really learn how to deliver better buildings that can improve health, well-being, and if you look at the holistic outcomes of sustainability, so not only about people, it's also about profit, so economic health, but also planet, so the environment. And if you look at different tools, the big difference is mandatory and voluntary. So mandatory tools for homes in Europe are energy performance certificates. So every home that goes onto the market for selling or for renting needs to display this EPC. It goes from G or F to A, where A is the best and G is the worst. In Australia, we have a star rating that goes from 0 to 10. 0 is a tent, and 10 in a climate like Melbourne, which is sort of cold temperate, means you don't need any heating or cooling. But we don't have mandatory disclosure, at least yet. And the last National Construction Code that came into force last year or in Victoria this year also adds another score. So now we get a whole of home score. The star rating just looked at the building envelope and how energy efficient that was. The whole of home score now takes into consideration not only the envelope, also the appliances, the efficiency of the appliances, if you are using renewable energy sources or fuel choices, and if you've got a battery, and the costs as well. So that new score is out of 100. These rating tools, so I talked about Europe, I talked about Australia. Mandatory tools are usually bounded by their geography, so by their jurisdiction. Sometimes they vary between detached homes, townhouses and apartments. So the targets that they have to achieve will often vary. Mandatory tools will always have qualified assessors. They are accredited. Some of these mandatory tools and some of the voluntary tools only look at the design of the building. That's certainly the case with the home energy ratings in Australia. But in Europe, for example, some of these tools will assess the actual performance of the building. Most of these mandatory tools look at energy only. Some of the voluntary tools are much broader in their scope. They look at water efficiency, they look at siting, they look at indoor air quality, etc. There are different methods of assessing it. So the Australian ones, because it's based on design, it's predicting performance. They're actually building simulations happening, whereas some of the rating tools that you get overseas, if they are performance-based, they actually look at people's bills. And also, if you are in the market, the duration of these certificates vary. Some are for the rest of their lives, and some need renewals every now and then. So just be mindful, if that is the case wherever you are, that you look at it. But if I now look, so that was all about mandatory stuff. If I look at the voluntary ones, because LEED, Passive House, Green Star are voluntary tools, and they are in varied countries. So Green Star is an Australian tool, LEED for homes is in the US, and Passive House originated in Germany, but now is becoming quite popular around the world. But there are more green building tools, Canada, South Africa, for example, and mostly they were developed for office buildings, just because there's more money in office buildings, and because they're voluntary. Companies that wanted to showcase their sustainability credentials would want something to show we are building best practice. So there was a little bit more money in that. So the home tools usually came a little bit later. What is interesting about these voluntary tools is that they usually go a little bit broader than just energy. So they will look at greenhouse gas emissions rather than just energy demand, for example. They look at renewable energy generation, water consumption or water energy efficiency, water sensitive design. So if it rains, what happens to that rainwater? Can we actually reuse that? They look at material impacts, occupant health when it comes to indoor air quality, for example. Some of them even look at management, or if you're doing innovative stuff. Passive House is the one which is most focused on energy. So there you don't have ranking. So, I said it's 0 to 10 or G to A. With a Passive House, it's pass or fail. And there are various criteria that you have to show when the house is built. So air tightness, for example, heating and cooling demand needs to be a certain very low level. And then they measure the total primary energy demand. So that is the energy that you need at the power station, realizing that between the power station and the home, there are a lot of losses. So you probably need 3 times the electricity at the power station to get 1 unit into your home. Passive house is really focused on comfort and sustainability in the term of energy. And that's why it's becoming more and more popular around the world, even in warmer climates like Australia. Green Star, so Green Star Homes in Australia, is also a relatively new initiative. I think it was released in 2021, whereas Green Star for offices has been around since the mid-2000s. Green Star markets their homes as being positive, healthy, and resilient. So quite a simple message. Positive is mostly around energy, thermal performance, energy-efficient appliances as well. And people, which I think is interesting in the context of home organization, householders get a user manual. This is your house. This is how you use it most efficiently. You get it with every washing machine, but if you buy a house, you usually don't get something like that. Healthy is all about indoor air quality, moisture management, and the materials and how toxic they are. And resilient is really interesting because that is looking into the future. Our climate is very likely to change. It's going to be warmer. There'll be less water. There is a higher chance of floods or extreme weather events. So how resilient is the home going to be when we look into the likely change of the climate? And lastly, LEED. That just stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. And that does have a residential design and construction tool as well, and certification. Similar to the Green Star, is quite broad. It looks at indoor air quality, light, etc., but also energy efficiency is just part of that. Again, it's voluntary, but you will have qualified assessors. And if you are in America, you have a second voluntary certificate for your home, and that's the Energy Star certification. So LEED is by the Green Building and Design Council in the US, whereas Energy Star is administered by the US Environmental Protection Agency. It's a lot about energy, draft proofing, leakage, insulation, performance of windows, etc. But it's voluntary. It's not mandatory.
Yeah, that was all such informative. That was really, really informative and super. Like, how do you retain all this information?
Well, I don't know all the tools. I know the most common tools. Obviously, I know the Australian tools. But I think what you implied is that there are just so many and they are so varied. And that is a big criticism of these tools. There are over 600 tools worldwide. So who's going to keep track of all of them? I think wherever you are in the world, there will be mandatory tools and you won't be able to get around them. Okay, so just focus on this. If you want to be a little bit broader, more holistic in the way, think about all the criteria beyond energy efficiency. So these tools really came about because of the recognition that our climate is changing and we need to mitigate it. Fossil fuel-based energy consumption is a key driver, and that's why we have to do something about the operation of our buildings. But most of these voluntary tools really are much broader in the way they approach and define sustainability. So, and I think that's the next generation anyway. If you are a little bit unsure about the voluntary ones and, you've got a house with certain certifications, just look at the certificate. And there's everything is online if you look it up. Most of them are predictive assessments. So they just look at the plans and whatever has been specified, and then they come up with a value judgment. Performance-based means it has actually been built and the house is being operated to a certain standard. So I think there's a little bit more, how can I say, both of them are trustworthy. And the performance ones, if someone is living in the house and not switching on the heating at all and living in a cold home, yes, then that is going to be low as well. So, but performance-based may be a little bit better of an indicator. Just ask how people use it.
Yeah.
And the other problem, and I think you've alluded to this, is the cost. These voluntary certificates, they cost money. So if you don't have the money, you want to build new, or you want to retrofit your home, think about the main principles that are underlying these criteria, like be energy efficient in the building envelope. So get that. Optimize that. The building envelope is the most important and expensive part. Double glazed windows, you'll only put in windows once. You want to change it in 10 years' time. Insulation, all this is expensive. Get that right. You will reduce energy demand. So then the little bit of energy you need to heat, to cool, to light, use very efficient appliances. And, there's star ratings for those. Go for the high-rated ones. They will save you money down the line. And then look at the energy choice. Can you go for something that is renewable? Can you put solar PV on your roof? So that's free if you're using it during the day. Can you have a washing machine that is smart? You can program it so it'll run while you are away in the office, but you're getting the free solar energy and you can run your washing machine, etc.
Yeah.
So look at it.
Yeah.
Look at the principles and just apply it without getting the certificate, because if you want to save that money.
Yeah, so essentially, all in all, I suppose the first step to any of this is probably to look up what the certification is, how they assess it, because this, like, depending on where you are in the world, this the information in this episode can't be really taken as Bible, because it operates differently in different parts of the world. So you kind of have to do your own research, which sounds annoying to some people potentially, but it's what you need to do in order, like, if you're going to make a big purchase, you're going to want to know what exactly you're buying, how it's being assessed. So
if I just may interrupt you there, Marie. So in most countries, there are energy assessors, there are home energy assessors, there are professionals out there which will be able to guide you. If your tummy hurts, you go to a doctor. You want to do something about your house, you go to a home energy professional. They will know whatever is mandatory or voluntary in your context. They will be able to guide you. They'll be able to look at the house that you want to build or that you want to buy, for example. They can do an assessment. They can guide you on what kind of retrofits may be needed to make it more comfortable. So really seek out those professionals.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like, if you're going to move, you're going to hire some moving professionals, So to wrap up this interview, could you tell us about what you found to be the most significant barriers to implementing green home designs on a broader scale?
It's a really interesting question. I think firstly, it is about how we talk about our homes. Very often it is about the size, the number of bedrooms, I don't know, the fancy appliances in the kitchen. Very seldom is there talk about the energy efficiency or sustainability credentials of a home. When you look at the tools, they just look at all the technical bits of the dwelling, sort of the house as it sits there at the materiality. But that is not meaningful for the people who live in it. They think it's a home. It's got emotions, it's got feelings. People have got aspirations. So bringing those two together, and I think some of the voluntary tools are really doing it when they talk about the homes as positive, healthy, resilient. they are promoting values rather than kilowatt hours per square meters. That doesn't tell normal people anything.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm an architect, and when I started looking into energy efficient homes, like I would talk to my householders and to my clients and say, we need to make this energy efficient, and this new mandatory tool is coming in. And it was like, my house is not going to fall down, but that's not my problem. My house needs to be energy efficient. Okay, that is your problem. Those are all functional criteria that I'm really not concerned with, because that's a given. I've got this 3-meter long cupboard that I've inherited from my grandmother. I want this to be able to go into my house. Also, my dream house will have gables. Oh, not energy efficient? I don't care. You make it work. My house needs to have gables. So what is meaningful for householders is very often very different. That is meaningful for policymakers who are trying to reduce climate change. So getting those things together, I think, is a big barrier. And, we need to do far better at communicating how those two are linked, and the importance of relationships. You're the householder. You want to build, you want to buy, you want to rent. And then there are all these professionals, the tradies. So who are you going to trust? And your question about reliability really played into that. Are you going to trust a tradie that hasn't had any training for 30 years and really has been doing the same thing for 30 years? Or are you going to trust someone who's very young, who wants to try out innovative things, who is willing to take the risk? Or are you going to trust your neighbor who's just done a retrofit and says, this works for me? So very often it's these social relations that then shape the decisions we make. Secondly, I think a big barrier in a country like Australia is that housing is seen as a commodity. So it's all about wealth building, it's about investment. And if you've got that kind of a mindset, then housing is just a product that you buy and sell, and that then translate into limited rights for renters. So in Australia, renters are more likely to live in poor performing homes, so less insulation, for example, than owner-occupiers. Renters are more likely to be on a lower income. Poor efficiency of the home means higher bills, and then that is really unfair. Also, if we have this housing as a commodity, anything we'll do or not do is exacerbated by the housing crisis, and there's often a lack of compliance. Even if we have minimum standards for rental homes, if there are no rental homes, you just need to take whatever is out there, then that really doesn't help with people complying. Also, there have been studies, at least in Australia, that sometimes tradies are really not complying with what is in the drawings. Now, as much insulation they're supposed to put in, or they're not putting it into the corners where it's difficult to get in. And I think that's sort of the last barrier, is actually the willingness of the industry to innovate, to do things differently. When there's so much work out there in new housing, retrofitting homes, which really is much better than building new, because you are using the materials and all the embodied energy that has gone into existing homes already. You're just making them better. It's quite difficult to get tradies who are trained in that kind of work. It's much easier, quicker, maybe higher profits. I'm not so sure in building new homes. If you're living in a country that has got a relatively small market, Australia or New Zealand, for example, compared with Europe or America, then to get high-performing products like triple glazing, it's quite common in Europe, but very difficult to get and then expensive to get in Australia because you need to import it. There just isn't the market for manufacturers to build something here. So I think that is a huge barrier. And then in countries like Australia, and it may be different, is similar in other areas, that there are regional differences just in the availability of workers who can do the work. If you're living in the big cities, there's a lot of construction happening there. There are tradies, but more difficult and perhaps then also more expensive to get it if you are in regional centers or even remotely.
And in your view, what is the future of green home design? Where do you think green home design will be going?
Good question. I think we used to be focused on energy efficiency, really. And most of the mandatory tools are really in that space where it's all about energy efficiency. But these voluntary tools have shown us that we could and we should look at far broader criteria to assess homes. It's a lot of investment that goes into homes. It's probably the biggest purchase you'll ever do. So really look at the other outcomes, health and also psychosocial outcomes of housing and how that can be done well, how that can be measured. And I think that is emerging. The other thing is that around the world, we are really moving towards zero energy, zero carbon homes. So at the moment, the operational emissions are much higher than the emissions that come from the bricks and the cement or the timber. So as the operational energy is going towards zero, that embodied impact is going to be proportionately much higher, or it's going to be the only stuff that you're really going to measure. So there is a shift already looking at really at the embodied impacts. Cement, for example, is very high in embodied energy. Bricks are fired in a kiln. We talked about pottery, it needs high temperatures to go so hard. High embodied energy, is it better? And can we build, for example, with lower embodied energy products like timber? And then if you look at the technological side, solar PV has become more and more common in Australia. I think the statistics are a third of our homes now have access to solar PV. But that really means that there is a blurring of the house and the people as energy consumers, and then the grid. So either you're using your own energy, you're giving back to the grid. As solar PV technology will become more advanced, we may have more building integrated photovoltaic systems. And then it's about the flexibility of where do I get my electricity? How much can I use myself? Electric vehicles are now bringing a whole new dimension to it because they can act as batteries as well. So it's about energy production, storage, and management, which used to be something that was managed by the distributors and generators of energy, and now it's in the realm of the home of the householders. I think also there'll be an increased focus on upgrading and retrofitting existing homes, just because that just saves a lot of impact. And then the last thing is about climate change resilience. How do we build our homes to prevent any unintended consequences because the climate is changing? Whatever we're building now will still be standing in 2050, 2070, or even in the year 2100, depending on how you build. It's likely going to be a very different climate, different impacts for householders. So it's not only about, it being warmer, vector-borne diseases will spread. You need more fly screens to protect yourself from mosquitoes, things like that. So there's a little bit of rethinking happening there.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that with us, Nicola. Now we'll move on to the open mic section. And this is your opportunity to talk about anything that you're passionate about that doesn't have to be related to the topic. So the floor is entirely yours. Please take it away.
It's a little bit about the topic.
Mhm.
And I think what my research is trying to overcome is that siloed thinking. So energy is often dealt with in one ministerial portfolio, and then you've got social impact somewhere else, and you've got health somewhere else, and they don't tend to talk to each other. So housing is such an important social determinant of health. If we build our houses so they promote health, they promote well-being, then it's a preventive health measure. Really, we could put money into making our homes safe and healthy and energy efficient. That would lower costs for energy concessions. It would lower public health costs, which then can be reinvested. But there's very little sort of cross-discipline, cross-sectoral collaboration happening at the moment. But I think because housing and energy and health are all so complex and they're in this system, which is about the provisioning of housing, the maintenance, the disposal, sitting within urban planning, within the city, within the whole world, because, whatever we do in one country will have effects all around the world. So to look at the equity of what we're doing, coming together across countries, across disciplines, and tackling things together, learning from each other, I think that is really going to be key in changing the world for the better. So I've got a housing and health course, for example. It's an elective, and students from all master programs at my university are invited. And that's always amazing because you have public policy, social work, energy efficient, sustainable buildings, nurses coming together, everyone with their own preconceptions, everyone with their own knowledge, and they come together, they learn from each other, and then produce these amazing interdisciplinary options and solutions, how they can tackle a housing challenge.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that with us and for joining us today. It's been such an informative episode, and I learned so much from you, genuinely. If our listeners want to find out more about you and what you do, where can they go?
It's probably easiest if they just go to my Strive profile on the RMIT University website. So all my publications are there, and my research projects and my contact details. So please get in touch.
All right, we'll link that in the show notes. Thank you everyone for tuning in to Room by Room, the Home Organization Science Insights podcast, and we will catch you in the next episode.
Thank you, Marie.
You've been listening to Room by Room, produced by the Home Organization Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes like this from across 10 life management perspectives can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, and other podcasting apps available on your smart devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps other people find it so we can grow and bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website at ho.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Gabriella Yastra. Thanks for tuning in.